Okay, everyone, it's 10:32. We're going to get started. It's so nice to see everybody back again on a Monday morning. I'm going to start with my all-time favorite quote that I have ever heard about the study of history. And it's not by a historian, but by a playwright you might be familiar with named William Faulkner. William Faulkner was a playwright who once wrote in his play, one of his plays, "The past is never dead. It isn't even past." To me, that is the most profoundly true statement that one can say about history. History is not dead and dusty and boring and passé, but it is a living, breathing force that shapes the events of our era. And Jewishly speaking, I think that quote, that the past isn't dead, it isn't even past, is so true. If we want to understand the Jewish world today, if we want to understand how our communities look the way they do, why they look the way they do, why it is that the Jewish world looks the way it does, we need to look at events of 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, even 1,000 years ago. History is a living, breathing force that shapes our identity as Jews. It shapes our lives as Jews. That's the theme I want to explore with you today. What I love about this course that we're doing together, Two Jews, Three Views, is that unlike in my high school classes, where I am very strict about moving chronologically in a correct fashion from point A to B, we can hopscotch all over the world in time and place. And so, although we did ancient Jewish history last year, I wanted to jump forward nearly 2,000 years ahead and look at a similar theme that plays itself out in fascinating ways with very important repercussions for the Jewish world today. In other words, in my very verbose way, what I'm trying to say is that I would like to look at the topic of the emergence of Reform Judaism and the challenge to tradition. I want to look at why the Jewish world today is split into so many different groups. I want to look at why it is that German Jewry in the 19th century created a movement that split the world, the Jewish world apart, and created shockwaves that the Ashkenaz world is still living with today. But because, as someone who's been, I'm going to call myself a semi-insider in the Sephardic community for the past 30 years, I am also interested in not only what happened to my community, the Ashkenaz Jewish community. I want to understand why it is that in Sephardic history, a similar development never took place. And we want to understand what is the secret to Sephardic communal cohesion and allegiance to tradition. I have always been fascinated by the commonalities and the differences in Sephardic and Ashkenaz history. And together, I want to explore this theme. And I'm hoping, we'll raise some uncomfortable questions, some controversial questions, but I'm hoping that together we will come up with some interesting observations and insights. So the first thing I want to do is ask a question that I ask my students all the time. I have them look at the syllabus and I'll say to them, of all the topics that we're discussing this year in modern Jewish history, which one do you think is most important? And of course, the kids look at the syllabus and most people will raise and say, oh, Mrs. Wielgus, if you're sure it's the Holocaust. The Holocaust is like the hugest thing that ever happened in modern Jewish history. And, obviously. Other students will sometimes raise their hand and say, no, I think it's the emergence of the state of Israel. That's like a huge revolutionary event in Jewish history. And of course, that's like the most important topic. And I will tell them, I asked you a trick question because the answer is not Holocaust. It's not the state of Israel, and it's not any of the other events that you might think of as the most important event in modern Jewish history. Rather, the single most important event in modern Jewish history is a subject that many of you have not too much of a clue about, but nevertheless, we're going to argue that it might very well be the most important topic you're ever going to learn about in modern Jewish history. And they're like, what is it? And I'm like, emancipation. And they're like, huh?
Assimilation.
Emancipation. What is that? What do you like? That's emancipation is the most important subject in modern Jewish history. And I will quote to them the words of a famous Jewish historian who argues, guys, that all, quote, all of modern Jewish history is a response to the challenge of emancipation. What on earth are we talking about, and why is this so important? Today, guys, we are going to address some of the most important questions that you can ever ask about Jewish identity and Jewish history. So let's begin. This is going to take us, I think, for at least the next two classes, because I also want to compare Sephardic and Ashkenaz responses to modernity. So let's begin. Here comes the 30-second summary of Jewish history in the Middle Ages. Here we have a typical street scene from ghetto life in the pre-modern period. And the story of medieval Jewish history, we can perhaps easily sum up with the following. If I could just ask everybody who's not muted to mute themselves. Thank you. Okay. Here. So guys, the Middle Ages, if I were to ask you to sum up medieval Jewish history, you could probably do it in a minute or less. Back in the Middle Ages, Jews were regarded as the other, the outsiders in Europe because of anti-Semitism. You Jews killed Christ. We therefore treat you as second class. You will be relegated to ghettos in Central and Western Europe. You will be legally discriminated against. You will be subject to the highest taxation of any group in Europe. You might be subject to expulsions. You're all familiar, guys, with the expulsion of Jews from Spain, but you probably know that Jews were expelled from France and England and just about every state in the German-speaking states in the 16th century and earlier. So Jews are subject to legal discrimination, sometimes to physical persecution. That's the story of medieval Jewish history. It's a story that's been told over and over again. What happens, though, in the modern period? Well, guys, does this look familiar to you? The tricolored flag, storming of a fort here. What event turns European history upside down, but also Jewish history upside down in the modern period? What are we looking at here, guys? Which revolution? Anybody?
French Revolution.
French Revolution. There you go. Someone had European history. The French Revolution, later taken over by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. And here we come to the billion-dollar question in Jewish history. Guys, Jews were second-class citizens. Along comes the French Revolution in 1789. And the French Revolution was spearheaded by men who, you all know that the French Revolution followed on the heels of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is an intellectual movement. I always tell my students, it's hard to think that once upon a time, there was an era in history where ideas led to revolutions. We don't live in an era really of isms. We don't live in an era where, when was the last time you heard of somebody changing their life because they read a book of philosophy? It's unusual. Today we live in a more materialistic world, I think. And once upon a time, in the Enlightenment, in the 18th century, ideas could change history. Ideas could change the trajectory of a person's life. And there were thousands of Europeans dedicated to this idea that reason and logic could explain the world around us, and reason and logic dictated that we needed to shake up society. And no longer should we have a society based on you're born into privilege. Does that make sense? Of course not. All human beings are born equal. And it doesn't make sense that a king has more rights than a peasant. And so the French Revolution comes about in order to create a more equitable society based on the ideas and ideals of the Enlightenment. What on earth does this have to do with Jewish history? And the answer is everything. Because if you believe, as an Enlightenment philosopher, that all human beings are created equal and that none should be privileged over others, you need to address the question of, but wait a minute, what did we do to the Jews, the only non-Christian minority in Europe? And you need to ask a very uncomfortable question. Why did we discriminate against Jews? Should Jews be a part of this new society, this new revolutionary society that we are creating? And guys, here comes the single most important idea that you will ever learn about Jewish identity. Because here we have a giant problem. Guys, what was the year of the French Revolution? Summer, July 14th. Summer, of those of you who had Mr. Rothbart in Flatbush might remember that that was his birthday, July 14th. But July 14th, 1789 is the date of the French Revolution. That date marks the emergence of a new European society, a new era in world history. All Frenchmen will now be granted their freedoms. All Frenchmen, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Very important, guys. No longer do you belong to these different groups, nobility, clergy, serfs. Everyone now is a citizen of the state enjoying equal rights. Guys, what was the date? 1789. Take a look at this. The Jews of France, unlike every other group in French society, are going to receive their emancipation not in July or the summer of 1789. It's going to take until September 28th, 1791 for the Jews to get their freedom. And guys, if you think about this, makes no sense. Every other group, Protestants, even executioners who were regarded as the lowest of the low, they had received their emancipation earlier. Why does it take the Jews so long to receive their emancipation? If you understand the answer to this question, you understand all of modern Jewish history. Let's go back to the question I asked here. This is a question that is so profound. And if you understand why it is so profound, you understand the challenge, what it means to be a Jew, the challenge of being a Jew in the modern period. Guys, are we Jews members of a nation or members of a religion? Those of you who took one of my courses last year, we may have discussed this in one of our classes. And this is the trillion-dollar question. Your thoughts, guys. Are we members of a faith, a religion, a dat, or are we members of an Am? Are we Am Yisrael?
That's the problem in Israel.
So Sally, you are so right that this question of Jewish identity is the single most important, problematic question ever asked in any era about and by the Jewish people. Meaning, we are, what's the answer, guys? It's a trick question. We are
a nation.
We are a nation. We are Am Yisrael. But wait a minute, to be Jewish is to be a member of a religion as well. We are a dat. We have a Torah. We are both a religion nation. I'm going to say something that you might think, Sally, we are, listen to this. We are the most astonishing thing you can say about the Jewish people is that we are the only people in the world in whom religion and national identity are intimately and inextricably intertwined. I do this with my students. I say, if you can think of another people in whom religion and national identity are intertwined like this, I will give you I will take you out for lunch. I will give you a free lunch. And kids will say, wait a minute, what do you mean? Yeah, Muslim. They will try and bring me examples of peoples in which national and religious identity intertwine, and we shoot down every one of their arguments. To be a Muslim in Saudi Arabia, there is a difference between being a French Muslim and a Saudi Arabian Muslim. To be a Buddhist, one can be a Japanese Buddhist or an American Buddhist. But to be a Jew, listen to this, independent of whether or not you live in Israel, independent of whether or not we are talking about pre-state or post-state, you are both a member of Am Yisrael and of a Dat Yisrael. And there is no other peoples in the world about whom one can say that, with the possible exception of, and I drive my students crazy, I say, there is one people that one could argue you do see elements of both a religion and a national identity, and I'll treat them to a free lunch if they come up with it. Usually I have to give them a hint. I'll give them a hint by saying, who's the most famous reality TV star and what's their nationality? Anybody know the answer to that? Anybody? Okay, no. If I say Kardashians, who are the Kardashians? What's their ethnic identity? They are Armenian. The Armenians are both members of a people and a church. They're not quite to the same degree as the Jews. Nevertheless, you could argue that they share this interesting national/religious identity with the Jewish people, which is fascinating. But in any case, let's go back to this. We Jews are both members of a religion and nation simultaneously. And guys, this is why we are a big fat problem for the world. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at the single most important debate in Jewish history, modern Jewish history. Guys, the Jews are getting fed up in France. It's 1791. Everybody else has gotten their rights. They can live where they want and be what they want and be as French as they want. But the Jews are still second class. And the Jews bring this before the French Parliament. And they say this isn't fair. And a debate breaks out, guys. And I tell my students, this is probably the single most important debate in modern Jewish history. Because you know what the problem is, guys? We are an Am and we are a dot. And the world can't wrap their minds around that. In the era of the French Revolution, remember the name of the document we mentioned a moment ago? The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. That's like the French Declaration of Independence. Look at that. The Declaration of the Rights of the Man and the Citizen. What is the French Revolution all about, guys? What is modern European history all about? It's about the creation of the identity of the citizen. Who are you loyal to now? You are loyal to the French state. You are no longer loyal to your group, whether it's clergy, nobility, you're a citizen. But wait a minute. What are those Jews? Are the Jews faithful to their people? Can the Jews be faithful to their state if they're both the religion and a nation? And guys, here comes a shocking statement made by the champion of Jewish freedom. This is a representative parliament who says, you know, the Jews have a point. They should have freedom like everybody else, except take a look at the statement, guys. Frightening. The Jews should be denied everything as a nation, but granted everything as individuals. Guys, here comes our argument that all of modern Jewish history is a response to the challenge of emancipation. This is the good guy. This is the good guy saying, you Jews, you can't have it both ways. You want to be a part of Am Yisrael, what you call your nation? Guess what? We cannot tolerate you then. You have to give up your national identity. You can only be a citizen of the French state. No longer can you be a part of the Jewish people because the French Revolution demands that of you. And for
but it still didn't help.
Sally, you have such good historical insight because it's exactly the problem. Now, here's what's fascinating. Take a look at the anti-Semite on the other side. On the other side, this particular Monsieur de la Fère says, you know what? I agree. I agree that a citizen of the state must be loyal to the state. The difference between the anti-Semite and the pro-Jew here, guys, look at this, guys. Both of them are saying only citizens of the state can be accepted. No one can have what we call, very scary term, dual loyalty. You cannot be loyal to your nation and the nation of France at the same time. What's the difference between the pro-Jew and the anti-Jew? The anti-Semite says, wait a minute, must one admit into the family tribe that is a stranger to oneself? He says the Jews cannot ever profess true loyalty to the French state. They will always be loyal to their people first and foremost. Whereas Clermont-Tonnerre says, maybe the Jews can do it. They must be citizens. We'll give them the opportunity, but if they do not want this, we shall then be compelled to expel them. Guys, this is the pro-Jew speaking. He's not that far from the anti-Semite. And this, guys, is the enormous challenge of what modernity, what emancipation brings to the Jews. You are all familiar with this fellow here, Napoleon Bonaparte. One of the most fascinating subjects that we studied together in senior year is Napoleon and the Jews. Because on the one hand, Napoleon was the great champion of Jewish liberation. Do you know that the first thing that Napoleon is the great general who conquered most of Europe. He brings the ideas and ideals of the French Revolution to every country that he conquers. And you know, the first thing that his his soldiers would do in every country that they conquered. They would knock down the walls of the ghetto and grant the Jews emancipation. And yet, it is the same Napoleon, the great liberator of the Jews, who also discriminated against the Jews in this bizarre story of the Sanhedrin. Napoleon, despite the fact that he gave the Jews freedom, is going to force the rabbis to come together and create this bizarre group called the Sanhedrin, in which he asks the Jews a series of increasingly uncomfortable questions like, does your law permit you to marry Frenchmen? Does your law require you to be loyal to the French state? And so on and so forth. Because Napoleon, despite his belief in the ideals of liberté, égalité, et fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, could not believe and did not believe that the Jews could be citizens of the state of France and profess loyalty to the French nation while still claiming their Jewish national identity. And guys, this is it. This is the whole problem. Are we Jews able to be loyal to our people and also the peoples among whom we live? What do you say? Anyone? One could argue, take a look at us as American citizens. Can we be proud, observant Jews who are loyal to Am Yisrael, who are loyal, yes, to the state of Israel, while still being good, patriotic American citizens? Just the opposite. One can argue that because we are loyal Jews, loyal to the idea of the Jewish people, we, the Jewish people, have given the world the ideals of democracy and representative government and the ideals of morality. Just the opposite, precisely because we are members of the Jewish people. That makes us loyal members of the people in any era, in any country. And you can see that in Jewish history. The only time we have rebelled is when our religious freedoms were taken away. Traditionally, historically, we Jews have been proven to be the most loyal citizens of the countries in which we live. But the world, and I think, Sally, you are so right, the world does not allow us that. The world for the last 300 plus years has said, we're not sure about your loyalties and where they lie. And that explains our topic today. That explains why in Germany in the 19th century, we are going to see a movement emerge that is going to rip the Jewish world apart, that is going to create a crisis that we still live with today, but it is not a crisis that one finds in the Sephardic world. And I want to explore both this movement and the crisis with you and look at what happens in the Ashkenaz world in contrast to what does not develop in the Sephardic world. So we're going to look first at 19th century Germany and the emergence of something called the Reform movement. You know, I do a little experiment with my students and I'll whip around the room and say, when I say Reform Judaism, what do you think about? And of course, the reaction is, oh, no observance of halacha, female rabbis, intermarriage, assimilation. And then I say to them, let's look at how and why the Reform movement emerges. And you're going to see something very ironic. Guys, in the wake of the French Revolution, Napoleon conquers just about all of Europe and Jews are granted emancipation. And that's true in the German states as well. But you guys know what happened to Napoleon. What happened at the end? Did Napoleon live forever? Did his French revolutionary movement last forever? And the answer, as you well know, is that Napoleon is eventually defeated by the conservatives who want to roll back the clock and destroy the French Revolution. And guys,
Jews which became assimilated. They dropped the religion and they taught.
Now the Jews, yes,
that they don't get right, but they were never accepted.
So the Jews of France in the French Revolution threw themselves into the business of being French. They out-Frenched the French. And while they're serving in the French Revolutionary Army and moving out of the ghetto and attending universities, they are trying so hard to prove their bona fide French loyalty. The problem is that, as Sally correctly points out, there is a deep suspicion of the Jews. You're not truly French. And outside France, the problem is even more severe, because in places like Germany, where Jews had tasted freedom during the revolutionary era, the conservatives come back into power and they rip the rug out from beneath the feet of the Jews, and they take away Jewish freedom and emancipation. And the Jews of Germany, who have begun this process of assimilation, who are trying so hard to prove their German loyalty, suddenly find themselves disenfranchised, suddenly find themselves as second-class citizens. And so, out of desperation to prove that they are German, that they are loyal to the German state, that they are good, loyal German citizens, they decide, a group of young Jews decide, that the time has come to shake things up and to show both Jews and non-Jews that they are worthy of German citizenship, they are worthy of being part of the German people, and at the same time, because so many Jews out of despair had been converting to Christianity and leaving Judaism, these Jews say, we need to save Judaism. We need to show Jews that Judaism is a modern progressive religion, while at the same time proving our loyalty to the German state. How do they do that is fascinating. They decide to reform Judaism. And guys, we don't think of Reform Judaism as a movement that doesn't believe in halakha, as a movement that is radically opposed to Jewish tradition and the Masorah. But you know what's so fascinating, guys? The Reform movement doesn't begin with people standing up and saying, no more Shabbat, no more Kashrut, no more Brit Milah, but rather with a building that is a reform, the first Reform temple. And guys, what do you think is the significance about the fact that the first Reform shul is not called a shul or a synagogue or a knis, as it is in Sephardic parlance, but rather a temple? What do you think that it implies? And this is the key to understanding the whole problem with Reform Judaism. Again, what's the goal? Show Jews and non-Jews that we are loyal to Germany, deserving of emancipation. We will get our citizenship. We will prove by modernizing our religion how worthy we are of German citizenship. Guys, temple. Where do you see a temple? Where did Jews have a temple? Where did Jews have a temple, guys?
The Beis Hamikdash.
Yes, the Beit HaMikdash. We had a temple when we lived in our own state. Guys, what is so radical and subversive about calling your shul in Germany a temple? What is the suggestion here? You can see it right here in the quote. You know what the Jews are doing? Look how radical and subversive. They're saying our temple now is not in Jerusalem or Zion. Berlin is our Jerusalem and Germany is our Zion. This is our homeland.
But if you know the history, they were never accepted. They
exactly right. And that's history playing itself out. It's never dead. It's not even past. Because exactly right. You know what's happening here, guys? And this is the story of modern Jewish history. The story of modern Jewish history is about Jews and non-Jews redefining, giving us, we give ourselves or others give us a new definition. You know what Reform is doing, guys? Reform Judaism is saying, we are no longer a religion / nation. We are only a religion, but not a nation. In doing so, they take 50% of what it means to be a Jew and they throw it out the window. Berlin is our Jerusalem and Germany is our Zion. And
Could I say something?
Yes, please, Rita, Dina.
But to me, it sounded more like they wanted to be a nation and not a religion.
Oh,
because
they want to
otherwise-
be
They
good.
dropped the religion. They
Want to be
Right.
they want to be part of the German nation. Germany is our Zion. So in other words, they're divorcing religious and national identity. You hit the nail on the head. They are saying we are now going to split the two, which had never been done in Jewish history before. For 2,000 years, we and others, the outside world understood, oh, you know, those Jews, they're unique. They're not part of our society. They are both an Am and a Dat in their own unique way. Now, Bina, along comes the reformers, as well as the Germans who say, choose, pick. You can't be both. You can be members of the German people if you give up your national Jewish identity. And so, you know what Jews now begin to call themselves? They say, we are Germans of the Mosaic faith. Note that new definition. What is our national identity? We are Germans by nationality. Our religion is Judaism, but our national identity is German. So Bina, you are so correct. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jews have now redefined what it means to be a Jew. This is the entire problem of modern Jewish identity. And it will bring up the issues that Sally raised before, the problem of identity today in the state of Israel, the problem of Zionist identity, because as we're perhaps going to explore in a later class, the Zionists, secular Zionism, will ironically do just the opposite. Secular Zionism will come along a bit later and say, no, Reform got it backwards. We're not a religion, we're only a nation.
Yeah.
And that too will, ironically, destroy traditional Jewish identity. We are, oh my gosh, rapidly running out of time. In fact, we have run out of time. Let me take 2 more minutes. No surprise then that when you see the first Reform rabbis in the 1800s, people like this man, Samuel Holtheim, notice the beer-headed identity here, as well as, let me show you this fellow here, Abraham Geiger. These are the 2 most famous Reform rabbis of the movement of Reform Judaism, and they are going to radically redefine what it means to be a Jew, and they are going to break 100% with halacha and misorah. We are members of the German faith, we are members of the German people. Our religion is something that needs to be updated and reformed before we can save Judaism for Jews and before the outside world can accept us. When we come back next week, we're going to further develop this theme. We're going to look at how Reform Judaism breaks definitively with Misorah and Halakha, and then address the fascinating question of why it is that in the Sephardic world, in Sephardic history, in Sephardic communal history, we do not ever have a break that is similar. Why not? Why not? That is the question I want to explore with you next week. I'll stop here for questions and comments. Myrna, you had a question or a comment?
No, sorry.
Oh, no, that's just, okay. Anybody else?
This was wonderful.
I have
Yes.
Thank
This
you.
is my first time, but you have been very, should I use the word enlightening? Now I'm afraid
Okay,
to
thank
use
you.
that
I
word.
appreciate it. Yes, pun intended. Thank you so much, Vina. And I look forward to next week's discussion. By the way, next week, some hot button issues. We're going to address the question of conversion in the Syrian community, issues of communal identity, and why it is that there was never a reform movement within Sephardic history. What does that mean for Sephardic communal identity? Why is it that the Ashkenaz world, we're going to look at an intermarriage rate that is 80%? That's crazy, guys. How do we explain the difference? So those are questions.
How much percentage?
The latest statistics, and I'll show you the chart next week.
Yeah.
The latest Pew report, 3 out of 4 non-Orthodox Jews will be or are expected to marry non-Jews today.
75%. Yeah,
75 to 80%, arguably, anywhere between 75 to 80%. I'll show you a very frightening chart based on the Pew report, but we'll do that next time. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And we look forward to next week further exploring this topic. Any additional questions or comments?
No, you see, the Germans never if you know the history, they never accepted them.
Yes,
They thought that they accepted, but they really were not. And Hitler really showed them.
I think part of the shocking lesson, which again, 80 years after the Holocaust perhaps no longer shocks us, is that so much of Jewish history, going all the way back to the ancient period, has been this attempt by Jews to find acceptance in the outside world. And we come back ultimately to the statement in the Talmud, Halacha yadua she'esav soneh Yaakov. No matter what, no matter how many attempts of it. I just taught my students in ancient Jewish history, and the boys will go crazy with this, you know, that in the Hellenistic period, don't think it's a story only of the 20th century, the 19th century, the 18th century. In the Hellenistic period, there were Jews who went so far as to try and reverse the Brit Milah because they were so ashamed of their otherness. They were so ashamed of their separate identity. And yet, it didn't help. So, Ein Chadash Tachat HaShemesh, you are so right, Sally.
No, they were not only ashamed. They wanted so much to be a part of it.
Yes.
That the first thing they dropped the religion.
Yes.
And they thought by dropping religion, they could be accepted, but
Absolutely.
they were never. Not in England.
Not in England, not anywhere.
And special in Germany, because the German Jews thought about themselves real Germans.
Absolutely. Germany is our Sion.
Actually, in the if you look at history, they were never accepted.
Yes, despite the fact that in World War I, the percentage of Jews who won the Iron Cross was higher than that of the general population. It doesn't matter how loyal, it doesn't matter how much blood is shed fighting for your homeland. This is unfortunately a truism. I want to add, like from a psychological perspective, I once read a phrase in a book by Howard Sachar, and he pointed out that it's a human need to want to, quote, partake of the universal. It's hard to always be the outsider. As to quote the immortal words of Tevye the milkman, you know, God, yes, I know we're the chosen people, but could you choose somebody else for a change? It's hard to be the chosen people. And so often in Jewish history, Jews have said, I'm tired. I want to be like everybody else. Leave me alone. But Sally, I think you're right. The world has never left us alone.
But you see what is also, the Jews think about themselves, especially in Germany, until till today.
Sally, the emphasis on German Jewry, you are so right. We can have a whole course on why is it that every single movement that emerges in modern Jewish history that creates this schism in Jewish history starts in Germany. We're going to explore conservative Judaism, neo-Orthodoxy. It's amazing. All in Germany. What is it about German history?
But you see,
these are million-dollar questions.
All the nations from those times disappeared. And only Jews, because of our religion.
I love that. Because of our religio/national identity, something that Sajjad Gaon put out many years ago.
There were so many nations.
That's the secret to Jewish survival. The fact that we are both Adat. And I'm so glad that you said that, because you want to end on a positive note. Despite the anti-Semitism, despite the inability of the world to truly ever accept us, we outlast them, we out-survive them, and we are still standing.
All nations disappeared.
All nations disappeared. Am Yisrael Chai. We are here. Anachnu kan. And on that note, see everybody next week, Monday.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.